The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its walls reaching toward a dome that showed the swirling nebulae of the Andromeda Galaxy. Representatives from 700 species sat in their designated sections, their various atmospheric requirements maintained by force fields that shimmered like soap bubbles. At the center of this vast assembly, a single chair remained empty. Humanity's seat, vacant for 3 standard years. Ambassador Zixathara of the Crystalline Confederation raised one of her 6 arms, the gesture causing her body to emit a soft blue glow. "The matter before us today requires no debate," she declared, her voice carrying through the translation matrices that allowed the diverse species to communicate. "The humans have proven themselves unfit for galactic society." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Vorthon delegation, their gas-form bodies contained within mechanical suits, pulsed with colors that indicated satisfaction. The insectoid hive mind representatives clicked their mandibles in unison, a sound like rainfall on metal that translated to approval. "They welcome the diseased," continued Zixathara. "They shelter the genetically inferior. They provide sanctuary to species we have rightfully cast out for the good of galactic civilization. This perversion of natural selection threatens the very foundation of our ordered society." High Counselor Mordun of the Hegemony leaned forward in his seat, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "The humans call it compassion," he said, the word dripping with disgust as it emerged from the translator. "They have turned their planet into a refuge for every failure, every genetic dead end, every species too weak to survive on its own." The evidence projectors activated, filling the air above the assembly with holographic displays of Earth. The images showed sprawling cities where multiple species lived side by side, hospitals where human doctors treated aliens with conditions their own species had abandoned as hopeless, and laboratories where human scientists worked alongside researchers from races that had been exiled from the galactic community. "Look at this abomination," Mordun continued, highlighting a section of New Geneva where a group of methane breathers lived in specially constructed habitats. "The methane breathers were exiled because their genetic instability makes them a threat to any spacefaring civilization. Their cellular structure breaks down in zero-gravity environments, making them worthless for galactic expansion. Yet the humans not only welcomed them, they built them homes." Another image showed the research facilities on Luna, where human and alien scientists worked together on projects the Council had deemed impossible or pointless. "And here," Mordun's voice rose, "they conduct research with the empathic collective, a species so emotionally unstable they cannot function in normal galactic society. The humans claim this emotional intelligence has value." Ambassador Kretok of the Silicon Lords stood, his metallic body reflecting the chamber's lights. "The humans have been warned repeatedly. When we expelled the phage survivors for their viral contamination, Earth welcomed them. When we cast out the time-touched for their temporal instabilities, Earth gave them sanctuary. When we banished the neurodivergent for their inability to conform to standard thought patterns, Earth called them neurodivergent and celebrated their differences." The assembly's mood grew darker. These were not merely humanitarian gestures, they were direct challenges to the Council's authority and the principles that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. "The humans have made their choice," Zixathara announced. "They have chosen chaos over order, weakness over strength, sentiment over logic. Therefore, I propose we formalize what has already become reality. Let humanity be exiled from the galactic community, their FTL capabilities revoked, their trade agreements terminated. Let them remain in their solar system with their collection of misfits and failures." The vote was swift and overwhelming. 700 species, representing billions of worlds and trillions of citizens, voted to exile humanity from the stars. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the International Space Station, watching as the last human trade vessel limped home from the Proxima Centauri colonies. The ship's hull bore scorch marks from Council enforcement vessels, and its cargo hold contained the final group of human diplomats and merchants being expelled from galactic space. 30 years of contact, she murmured to her companion, Dr. Veltar, a former council scientist whose research into emotional resonance had led to his exile before he found refuge on Earth. 30 years of trying to prove we belonged out there. Veltar's tentacles moved in what humans had learned to recognize as a shrug. Perhaps belonging was never the point, he said through his translation device. Perhaps the question was whether out there deserved us. Sarah turned from the viewport to look at her friend. Veltar had been one of the first exiles Earth had welcomed, arriving 15 years ago when the Council decided his theories about the beneficial effects of emotional diversity were dangerous to social stability. His work with human psychologists had revolutionized understanding of both species' mental health. The Council's courier ship delivered the official decree this morning, Sarah said. We're officially quarantined to the Sol system. No human vessel is permitted beyond the heliopause. Any attempt to leave will be met with force. And how does humanity respond to this judgment? Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Veltar's chromatic patches shift to colors of curiosity and wariness. We've called a meeting. Every species currently residing on Earth or in the Sol system, even the ones the Council considers too dangerous to acknowledge exist. The meeting took place in the newly constructed Diversity Assembly Hall in New Geneva, a structure designed to accommodate the vastly different environmental needs of Earth's refugee population. The hall itself was a marvel of human adaptability. Sections of it existed in different atmospheric conditions, gravity fields, and even temporal flows to accommodate species with unusual needs. President Martinez of the Earth Federation stood at the central podium, her words being simultaneously translated into hundreds of languages and communication methods. Around her, representatives from 63 different species listened. Some sat in chairs, others floated in specialized tanks, and a few existed as patterns of energy contained within magnetic fields. The Galactic Council has made their position clear, President Martinez began. They believe that our willingness to help those they've cast aside makes us unfit for their society. They see our diversity as weakness, our compassion as foolishness, our refusal to abandon the vulnerable as a threat to their order. She paused, looking around the assembly at faces, energy patterns, and sensory organs that represented some of the most remarkable minds in the galaxy. Minds the Council had deemed worthless. They're probably right about one thing, she continued. We are a threat to their order. Because we've learned something they've forgotten. Strength doesn't come from homogeneity. Innovation doesn't come from conformity. Survival doesn't come from abandoning those who struggle. Dr. Kenthara of the neurodivergent species, her head crest flashing with rapid thought patterns, stood to speak. The humans have given us something we never had under Council rule, she said, her words coming in rapid bursts as was typical of her species. Not just shelter, but purpose. My people's different thinking patterns were seen as a disorder. Here, they call us neurodivergent and value the unique perspectives we bring to problem solving. Commander Bresk of the phage survivors, his scarred carapace bearing the marks of the viral infection that had led to his species' exile, added his voice. The Council feared our contamination. The humans taught us to control it, to use it. Our viral adaptations have become the foundation for new medical treatments that have saved millions. One by one, representatives spoke. The time touched, whose unstable relationship with temporal flow the Council saw as dangerous, had become Earth's most valuable physicists, their unique perspective allowing breakthrough discoveries in temporal mechanics. The empathic collective, whose emotional instability the Council couldn't tolerate, had revolutionized human understanding of psychology and social dynamics. "We are the unwanted," President Martinez concluded. "The genetic dead ends, the social misfits, the dangerous experiments that didn't work out as planned. But together, we've built something the Council never expected. We've built a civilization that doesn't just survive diversity, it thrives because of it." She activated a holographic display showing the Sol system as it existed now. Earth glowed with the lights of a dozen different species settlements. Mars hosted research facilities where impossible collaborations produced breakthrough after breakthrough. The asteroid belt buzzed with mining operations run by species whose unique physiologies made them perfect for the work. Europa's oceans housed aquatic species who had nowhere else to go, while Titan's methane lakes provided homes for the methane breathers. "The Council thinks they've exiled us," President Martinez said. "They think they've cut us off from the galaxy, trapped us in this one small system with our collection of rejects and failures." Her smile was fierce, and every translation device in the room struggled to convey the complex emotions behind it. They have no idea what they've just unleashed. The weeks following the exile decree were filled with frenetic activity across the Sol system. Ships moved between worlds carrying not just cargo, but ideas, plans, and a growing sense of purpose that had been building among Earth's refugee population for years. In the research laboratories of Luna, Dr. Pia Chen worked alongside teams that represented the greatest minds the galaxy had to offer, minds the Council had discarded. The Temporal Mechanics Lab, staffed primarily by time-touched researchers, had made a breakthrough that sent ripples of excitement through the scientific community. "The Council's understanding of faster-than-light travel is fundamentally flawed," Dr. Chantel explained, her species' temporal instability allowing her to perceive time in ways that provided unique insights. "They use brute force methods, tearing holes in space-time and forcing their way through. It works, but it's inefficient and dangerous." She activated a display showing the Council's FTL network, a web of jump gates and wormhole generators that required massive amounts of energy and left destabilizing effects on local space-time. "But temporal mechanics suggests a different approach," Chantel continued. "Instead of forcing our way through space, we can convince space to move around us. The mathematics are incredibly complex, requiring perspective shifting that the Council's rigid thinking patterns cannot achieve." Dr. Chen studied the equations floating in the holographic display. They hurt to look at directly, seeming to shift and change as her linear human perception tried to process temporal mathematics. "You're talking about space-time manipulation on a scale that makes current FTL look like a rowboat compared to a starship." "The theory is sound," Dr. Veltar added from his workstation. "The empathic collective's research into resonance patterns provides the emotional mathematics needed to make the calculations stable. The neural divergent species' nonlinear thinking processes can solve equations that would take Council computers centuries to process." Around the lab, other teams worked on complementary projects. The phage survivors had developed biological computers that could adapt and evolve their processing power in real time. The Silicon Lord's exiles had created quantum processors that existed in multiple states simultaneously. The hive mind's outcasts had learned to network consciousness across vast distances without the rigid control their parent species demanded. "How long?" Dr. Chen asked. "To develop a working prototype? With our combined resources and the unique capabilities each species brings." Chantel's temporal perception flickered as she calculated possibilities across multiple timelines. 18 months, perhaps less. The implications were staggering. The Council had exiled humanity and its refugee allies, believing they were cutting them off from the galaxy. Instead, They had inadvertently created the conditions for a technological revolution that could make Council technology obsolete. Dr. Chen activated her communication link to Earth. "Mr. President, you need to see this." President Martinez arrived at Luna within hours, along with a delegation that included representatives from every major species group in the Sol system. The presentation that followed lasted 6 hours and fundamentally changed how humanity viewed its place in the galaxy. "We're not just developing new technology," President Martinez said as the delegation reviewed the preliminary results. "We're developing a completely different approach to existence in space. The Council sees diversity as a problem to be managed. We're proving it's the solution to problems they can't even imagine." The room fell silent as the full scope of the project became clear. They weren't just building better ships or faster computers. They were creating a new model for spacefaring civilization, one based on cooperation rather than competition, diversity rather than conformity, acceptance rather than exile. "The Council thinks they've contained us," said Commander Bresk, his scarred features thoughtful. "They believe their quarantine has neutered the threat they saw in our methods." "Let them think that," President Martinez replied. "Let them believe they've solved their problem by hiding us away in one small system." She looked around the room at the assembled representatives of species the galaxy had thrown away. Minds the Council had deemed worthless, perspectives they had declared dangerous. "When we're ready, when our new technology is complete, we won't be asking permission to rejoin galactic society." Her words carried a weight that made the room's translation devices struggle with emotional undertones. "We'll be offering the galaxy a choice." The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to proceed with what they began calling the Liberation Project. Not just liberation from the Council's technological limitations, but liberation from their entire philosophy of exclusion and genetic supremacy. As representatives returned to their ships and stations, Dr. Chen remained on Luna, staring through the observation deck at the blue marble of Earth hanging in the star-filled void. Somewhere out there, beyond the heliopause, lay a galaxy that had decided humanity and its allies were unworthy of the stars. Soon, they would discover just how wrong they had been. The stars had exiled their kind, but Earth had welcomed life with open arms. And that difference was about to change everything. 3 years had passed since the Council's exile decree, and the Sol system hummed with activity that would have amazed any outside observer. What had once been humanity's modest foothold in space had become a thriving multi-species civilization, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony, humanity's first ship, built with the new Liberation Drive technology. The vessel itself defied every principle of Council ship design. Where Council ships were sterile, uniform environments designed for single species, the Harmony was a marvel of adaptive architecture. Its corridors could shift between different atmospheric compositions, gravity fields, and even temporal flows to accommodate its diverse crew. "Final systems check complete," reported Commander Zethkar, the ship's phage survivor chief engineer. His viral adaptations had proven perfect for interfacing directly with the ship's biological computer systems, creating a level of integration that Council ships couldn't match. The Liberation Drive is operating at optimal parameters. Dr. Chantel, the time-touched navigator, flickered slightly as she reviewed calculations that existed across multiple temporal dimensions. "Destination coordinates locked. The journey to Kepler 442b will take 47 minutes using the new space folding technique. 47 minutes to travel 1,200 light-years. The Council's fastest ships would need 3 months for the same journey, and their passage would leave detectable distortions in space-time that could be tracked for decades. The Liberation Drive left no trace at all. "Signal from Earth Control," announced Communications Officer Tavara, one of the neurodivergent whose rapid-fire thought processes made her perfect for managing the complex multidimensional communication arrays. President Martinez sends her regards and reminds us that we're not just representing humanity out there. Captain Vasquez smiled. No, we're representing something entirely new. She looked around the bridge at her crew. Humans, time-touched, phage survivors, neural divergent, empathic collective members, and half a dozen other species. All stations report ready? A chorus of confirmations came back in a dozen different languages and communication methods. The bridge's translation matrix seamlessly converted clicks, color patterns, chemical emissions, and electromagnetic pulses into a symphony of readiness. Engage the liberation drive. The ship didn't lurch or vibrate like council vessels during FTL transition. Instead, reality simply shifted. The stars outside the viewports began to move in patterns that hurt to watch directly as space-time itself bent around the ship. For 47 minutes, the Harmony existed in a pocket of altered physics, traveling faster than light by convincing the universe that it was already where it needed to be. When normal space reasserted itself, they hung in orbit around a blue-green world that could have been Earth's twin. Kepler 442b had been marked in Council databases as uninhabitable due to indigenous biological complications and banned from contact for over 200 years. Scanning for the complications mentioned in Council records, reported Science Officer Kenthera, her neural divergent analysis capabilities allowing her to process sensor data in ways that revealed patterns invisible to conventional scanning. I'm detecting massive biodiversity readings, complex ecosystem interactions, and... Oh. What is it? Captain Vasquez asked. Captain, the biological complications the Council was worried about. They're not contamination or disease. The planet has evolved a form of ecosystem-wide consciousness. The biosphere itself is sentient. The implications sent ripples of excitement through the bridge crew. This was exactly the kind of discovery the Council's rigid thinking prevented them from making. They saw consciousness that didn't fit their standard patterns as a threat to be avoided rather than a wonder to be explored. Any signs of technological civilization? Captain Vasquez asked. Negative on traditional technology, Kenthara replied. But I'm reading massive, coordinated biological structures that serve technological functions. Living buildings, organic transportation networks, bio-integrated information systems. It's like the entire planet has become a single, vast organism. Dr. Veltar, the empathic collective member serving as the ship's psychological specialist, began receiving impressions through his emotional sensitivity abilities. Captain, I'm detecting emotional emanations from the planet. Curiosity, primarily. Some wariness, but also... hope? Hope? The planetary consciousness knows we're here. It's been waiting for contact, but not from the Council. Its emotional patterns suggest it tried to communicate with Council ships before, but they fled without attempting to establish contact. Captain Vasquez made the decision that would echo through galactic history. Open a communication channel. All frequencies, including empathic, quantum, and biological resonance patterns. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The planet itself spoke to them, not in words, but in concepts that flowed directly into their minds through the ship's empathic collective interfaces. Welcome, the world mind said. We are Gaia 771 Prime, though your translation matrices may call us simply Verdania. We have waited long for beings who speak in harmonies rather than single notes. The bridge crew exchanged glances. The planetary consciousness was referring to their multi-species nature, recognizing something the Council had never understood. We are the crew of the UES Harmony, Captain Vasquez replied through the communication matrix. We come from a world that welcomes diversity. We would like to learn from you if you're willing to share. Share? The concept came back tinged with amazement. The rigid minds who came before spoke only of cataloging, classifying, determining our usefulness to their purposes. You speak of learning. This is different. Over the following hours, an extraordinary exchange took place. Verdania was indeed a world-spanning consciousness, but not in the way the Council's limited thinking had assumed. It wasn't a single mind controlling everything, but rather a vast network of interconnected life forms that had evolved beyond individual consciousness while maintaining personal identity for each component. Every plant, animal, microorganism, and geological feature on the planet participated in a democratic consciousness that made decisions through consensus rather than control. It was the ultimate expression of the diversity in unity principle that the Sol System's refugees had been developing. Your ship, Verdania observed, carries within it the patterns we have seen in visions shared across the quantum foam, many kinds of mind, working as one purpose, yet each maintaining the song that makes them unique. How long have your species achieved this harmony? We haven't achieved it yet, Captain Vasquez admitted. We're still learning. Our own world welcomed other species who were cast out by the galactic powers. We're trying to build something new. Cast out? The planetary emotion patterns shifted to something like anger. The rigid minds cast out those who could not fit their narrow patterns. They call it maintaining order, Dr. Veltar explained. Species that don't conform to their standards of genetic purity, social structure, or thinking patterns are exiled from galactic society. The planet's response was a complex mixture of emotions: sorrow for those who had suffered, anger at the injustice, but underlying it all, a deep satisfaction. Then our waiting has not been in vain. We have much to offer those who have been cast out. And perhaps we have found the ones who can help us reach the others. Others? Captain Vasquez asked. Verdania shared a vision that left the bridge crew stunned. Across the galaxy, dozens of worlds like this one existed, worlds the Council had marked as forbidden or dangerous, not because they were hostile, but because they represented forms of life and consciousness that challenged the Council's fundamental assumptions. There was Synthesis Prime, where organic and artificial life had merged so completely that the distinction no longer mattered. The Council had banned contact because they couldn't classify the inhabitants as either biological or mechanical. There was the collective of Tau Ceti, where an entire star system's population shared a quantum-entangled consciousness while maintaining individual identities, something the Council deemed impossible and therefore threatening. There was Nova Haven, where species the Council had declared extinct had evolved beyond physical form, but maintained their cultural identities as energy beings. Dozens of worlds, hundreds of unique forms of life and consciousness, all hidden from galactic civilization because they didn't fit the Council's narrow definitions of acceptable existence. They've been waiting, Verdania explained. Waiting for someone to come who could understand diversity without needing to control it, someone who could see strength in difference rather than threat. Captain Vasquez felt the weight of realization settling on her. The Council hadn't just exiled humanity and its refugee allies. They had inadvertently created the key to unlocking a hidden galaxy of wonders they had been too rigid to discover. We need to contact Earth, she said. This changes everything. The return journey to Sol took only 38 minutes, the ship's navigation officer having learned to optimize the Liberation Drive's space-folding efficiency during their stay at Verdania. The message they carried back would fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of their situation. President Martinez called an emergency session of the Diversity Assembly, with representatives from every species in the Sol system gathering in New Geneva's Great Hall. The recording of Verdania's communications played through the chamber's translation matrices, rendering the planetary consciousness's concepts into forms each species could understand. When the recording ended, The silence stretched for long minutes before anyone spoke. Finally, Dr. Chen, now director of the Sol System Scientific Cooperative, broke the silence. "We're not alone. We were never alone. The galaxy is full of diverse forms of life and consciousness that the Council has been systematically hiding from the rest of galactic civilization." Ambassador Kretak of the Silicon Lord's Exiled faction raised one metallic appendage. "The implications are staggering. If even a fraction of what this planetary consciousness suggests is true, then the Council's version of galactic civilization represents only a small percentage of actual galactic life." President Martinez stood at the central podium, her expression thoughtful. "We have a choice to make. We can continue building our isolated civilization here in Sol, perfecting our technologies and our society. Or," she paused, looking around at the assembled representatives of species the galaxy had discarded. "Or we can do what we've always done. We can reach out to those the Council has abandoned and forgotten. We can build something bigger." The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Some argued for caution. The Sol system was finally prospering, its refugee populations finding peace and purpose. Why risk that stability for unknown worlds that might not welcome contact? Others argued for action. The Liberation Drive technology gave them capabilities the Council couldn't match. They could reach worlds the Council couldn't, establish contact with forms of life the Council had deemed impossible or dangerous. In the end, it was Dr. Kenthara of the Neural Divergent who provided the decisive argument. Her species' rapid-fire thinking patterns allowed her to process all the variables and possibilities in ways others couldn't. "The Council exiled us because they saw our differences as threats," she said, her words coming in characteristic bursts. "But differences are only threatening if you're trying to maintain uniformity. If you're trying to build something new, differences become advantages." She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy as they now knew it existed. Not the Council's version of controlled space and forbidden zones, but a vast tapestry of diverse life forms hiding from rigid authority. Every world the Council has marked as forbidden, every species they've declared impossible, every form of consciousness they've deemed threatening, they're all potential allies. They're all pieces of a puzzle the Council refused to solve. Her display shifted to show potential networks of contact, trade routes between hidden worlds, exchanges of knowledge and technology that could revolutionize understanding of life itself. "The Council thinks they've contained the threat we represent by trapping us in Sol, but they've actually given us the perfect position. We're outside their controlled space, free to make contact with everyone they've rejected." "And when we've built our own network?" President Martinez asked. Dr. Kenthara's chromatic patches flashed with the colors of satisfaction and determination. "When we've built our own network, we won't need to ask permission to rejoin galactic civilization. We'll be offering the galaxy a choice between the Council's narrow vision and something infinitely larger." The vote was close, but decisive. The Sol system would become the hub of what they began calling the Liberation Network, a growing alliance of the exiled, the forbidden, and the forgotten. Within weeks, ships began launching from Sol system shipyards. Each vessel carried crews representing the full diversity of refugee species, equipped with Liberation Drive technology that could reach worlds the Council had never imagined visiting. Captain Vasquez found herself commanding a growing fleet of exploration vessels, each one designed to make contact with life forms the Council had deemed too dangerous or impossible to exist. The UES Harmony became the flagship of what historians would later call the Great Reconnection. Ship after ship launched from Sol, carrying crews trained in first contact protocols that emphasized understanding over classification, cooperation over control. They reached Synthesis Prime and found a civilization where the boundaries between organic and artificial life had dissolved so completely that their technology had become a living ecosystem. The inhabitants welcomed contact with beings who could understand existence beyond rigid categories. They contacted the collective of Tau Ceti and discovered a distributed consciousness that spanned solar systems while allowing each individual to maintain their personal identity and freedom. The collective had been developing music that could be performed across interstellar distances, creating art forms impossible for single-world civilizations. They found Nova Haven's energy beings who had transcended physical form but maintained rich cultural traditions that dated back millions of years. These beings had been observing the galaxy's development, waiting for spacefaring civilizations mature enough to understand that consciousness could take forms beyond the biological. Each contact brought new technologies, new perspectives, new ways of understanding existence that the Council's rigid thinking had made impossible to discover. More importantly, each contact brought new allies to a growing network that operated outside the Council's knowledge or control. The Liberation Network grew rapidly. Within 2 years of the first contact with Verdania, 47 different worlds had joined the alliance. Each brought unique capabilities that complemented the others: biological technologies, consciousness-bridging techniques, space-time manipulation methods that made the liberation drive look primitive by comparison. The Council remained unaware of these developments. Their monitoring systems were designed to detect their own FTL technology and the energy signatures of the civilizations they controlled. The Liberation Network's technology operated on completely different principles, leaving no traces the Council could recognize. From their perspective, the troublesome humans and their refugee allies had been successfully contained in the Sol system. The exile had worked. The threat to galactic order had been neutralized. They had no idea that their greatest mistake was about to reveal itself. In the depths of space, far from any Council monitoring stations, representatives from 71 different worlds and species gathered for the first Liberation Network Congress. The meeting took place aboard a vast biological structure grown by Verdania's consciousness, a living space station that could adapt itself to accommodate any form of life. President Martinez, now elected as the first Speaker of the Liberation Council, stood before an assembly that represented more genetic, cultural, and consciousness diversity than had ever been gathered in one place in galactic history. 3 years ago, the Galactic Council believed they were solving a problem, she began. They saw our willingness to welcome the exiled and the different as a threat to their order. They thought isolation would contain that threat. Around the vast chamber, beings of every conceivable form listened. Some sat in chairs, others floated in specialized environments, and a few existed as patterns of energy or quantum probability. All were united by their rejection of the Council's rigid vision of acceptable existence. Instead, they've helped us discover that their galactic civilization represents less than 15% of actual galactic life. The rest has been hiding from their narrow vision, waiting for someone who could see strength in diversity rather than threat. She gestured to the displays showing the growing Liberation Network, worlds connected not by conquest or trade agreements, but by mutual respect for the infinite varieties of existence the universe had produced. The time has come to offer the galaxy a choice, not through force, not through politics, but by example. We're going to show them what civilization looks like when it's built on inclusion rather than exclusion. The plan that emerged from the Congress was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than confronting the Council directly, the Liberation Network would simply reveal itself. They would make contact with Council member worlds, not as conquerors or rebels, but as representatives of a larger galactic community the Council had never imagined. Ships equipped with the most advanced technology the galaxy had ever seen would arrive at Council worlds carrying messages of welcome and invitations to join something bigger than the rigid order they had known. The Council would face a choice. They could acknowledge the existence of forms of life and consciousness they had spent millennia denying, or they could reveal to their own populations just how much of the galaxy they had been hiding. Either way, the Age of Exile was about to end. The first Council world to receive Liberation Network contact was Hegemony Prime, home to the species that had been most vocal in humanity's exile. High Counselor Morden was reviewing trade disputes when his aide burst into his chambers with news that would shatter the Council's understanding of the galaxy. "Sir, there's a ship in orbit. It appeared from nowhere. No jump signature, no wormhole residue, no energy trail. It simply materialized." Morden's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this impossible information. Impossible. All FTL technology produces detectable signatures. What kind of ship? That's the problem, sir. We don't recognize the design. It doesn't match any Council vessel type, and it's enormous. The ship is broadcasting on all frequencies in perfect hegemony standard, requesting permission to send diplomatic representatives. Within hours, Morden found himself in the planet's primary diplomatic chamber, facing beings he had hoped never to see again. Captain Vasquez sat at the negotiation table alongside representatives from a dozen species he recognized, and a dozen more he didn't. "High Counselor Morden," Captain Vasquez said, her voice carrying the same diplomatic courtesy the Council prided itself on. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We bring greetings from the Liberation Network and an invitation to join a larger galactic community." Morden's translator struggled with the term Liberation Network. The concept seemed to suggest freedom from something, but freedom from what? "Captain Vasquez, humanity was exiled from Council space 3 years ago. Your presence here violates the terms of that exile. With respect, High Counselor, we're not here as representatives of humanity alone. We represent 71 worlds and over 200 different forms of life and consciousness. Most of them exist in regions of space your Council has marked as forbidden or impossible." The alien sitting next to Captain Vasquez flickered slightly, and Morden realized he was looking at one of the time-touched beings the Council had declared too dangerous for normal space-time. "High Counselor," the being said, its temporal instabilities making its words echo strangely, "we've come to offer your people something your Council has never been able to provide." "And what might that be?" Morden asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Knowledge of what the galaxy actually looks like." The holographic display that filled the chamber showed a map unlike anything in the Council's databases. Where Council star charts showed vast empty regions marked as uninhabitable or quarantine zones, the Liberation Network's map revealed a thriving tapestry of life. Hundreds of worlds glowed with the markers of active civilizations. Species the Council had declared extinct showed as thriving communities. Regions of space the Council avoided as temporally unstable or biologically hazardous pulsed with the energy signatures of advanced technologies. "This is impossible," Morden whispered. "The Council has surveyed the galaxy for over 10,000 years. We would have detected these civilizations." Dr. F. Canthera of the neural divergent species leaned forward, her rapid thought patterns allowing her to speak in bursts that conveyed complex ideas efficiently. "Detected with what?" Council scanning technology is designed to recognize Council technology. Council contact protocols assume Council social structures. Council thinking patterns prevent Council minds from recognizing forms of consciousness that don't match Council templates. Another representative, this one a shimmering energy pattern that spoke through electromagnetic modulation, added its voice. "We are Nova Haven Collective Entity Designation Harmony 77. Our species achieved post-physical existence 12 million years ago. Council ships have passed through our star system 1,247 times. Not once did their instruments register our presence because they scan only for matter-based consciousness." Morden felt the foundations of his worldview beginning to crack. But the quarantine zones exist for good reasons. The biological hazards, The temporal instabilities? High Counselor, said a voice from what appeared to be empty air, until Morden realized he was hearing from a representative of a species that existed in quantum superposition. We invite you to examine the evidence yourself. Send a survey team to any of the regions your council has marked as forbidden. We'll provide you with scanning technology that can detect forms of life your current instruments miss. And if we refuse? Captain Vasquez's expression remained friendly, but there was steel beneath it. Then you continue as you have. The Liberation Network isn't here to threaten or conquer. We're here to extend an invitation to something larger. Your people can choose to remain within the Council's limited vision of the galaxy, or they can discover what lies beyond it. The meeting ended with Morden's promise to present the Liberation Network's proposal to the full Council. As the diplomatic shuttle returned to the mysterious ship in orbit, he found himself staring at star charts he had trusted his entire life, wondering what they had missed. The Council's emergency session was chaotic. Representatives from 700 species argued, demanded explanations, and voiced fears that ranged from reasonable to paranoid. The central chamber echoed with translated arguments as the assembly tried to process the implications of humanity's return. Ambassador Zixathara of the Crystalline Confederation called for order, her crystalline body glowing with stress patterns. The humans claimed to represent 71 worlds. Even if this is true, it represents less than 1% of council membership. This Liberation Network, whatever it is, poses no real threat to galactic order. High Counselor Morden activated the diplomatic recording of his meeting with the Liberation Network representatives. The chamber fell silent as they watched technologies they couldn't explain and heard claims that challenged everything they believed about the galaxy. When the recording ended, the silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Grand Admiral Kethvar of the Stellar Defense Force stood to speak. I've reviewed the tactical data from this encounter. The ship that appeared at Hegemony Prime represents technology beyond our current understanding. It's not just advanced, it operates on principles we don't recognize. You're suggesting these exiles have developed superior technology? Asked Representative Ethera of the Trade Consortium. I'm suggesting that what we're seeing is impossible with any known technology. Ships don't simply appear in orbit without FTL signatures. Translation matrices don't seamlessly handle forms of communication that exist outside normal space-time. These beings are claiming capabilities that violate our understanding of physics. The debate that followed revealed the depth of the Council's crisis. Some representatives demanded immediate military action against what they saw as a rebellion of exiled species. Others called for investigation of the Liberation Network's claims. A growing minority began questioning whether the Council's policies of exile and quarantine had been hiding important discoveries about galactic life. In the end, the Council chose compromise, a decision that would prove to be their final mistake. They authorized a joint survey mission to 3 of the regions the Liberation Network claimed contained hidden civilizations. The mission would use Council technology supplemented with scanning equipment provided by the Liberation Network, allowing them to verify or disprove the claims about life forms the Council couldn't detect. Admiral Kethvar personally commanded the survey fleet, 3 heavy cruisers carrying the Council's best scientists and diplomats. The Liberation Network provided escort vessels and technical support, promising to reveal worlds the Council had never imagined. The first destination was the Syntheses system, marked in Council databases as uninhabitable due to technological contamination. According to the Liberation Network, it was home to a civilization where organic and artificial life had merged so completely that the distinction no longer mattered. The Council fleet emerged from their wormhole jump to find empty space. Their instruments detected no signs of civilization, no energy signatures that indicated advanced technology, no radio communications or other signals of intelligent life. I told you this was a deception, Admiral Kethvar muttered. There's nothing here but the technological debris that made us quarantine this system in the first place. The Liberation Network escort, a sleek vessel that seemed to shift and adapt its shape even as they watched, moved closer to the flagship. Admiral, with your permission, we'd like to activate the supplementary scanning array we provided. Very well. But this had better not be some kind of trick. The moment the Liberation Network scanners came online, the Council fleet's displays exploded with data. The empty space around them revealed itself to be teeming with structures that existed in quantum superposition. Buildings, transportation networks, and habitats that phased in and out of normal space-time. "By the void," whispered Dr. Sallin, the fleet's chief scientist. "Admiral, we're surrounded by a massive civilization. The entire system is inhabited, but the population exists partially outside normal three-dimensional space. Beings began materializing on the Council ships, not teleporting aboard, but shifting from quantum probability into physical reality. They appeared human-like at first glance, but closer inspection revealed the integration of organic and artificial components so complete that it was impossible to tell where biology ended and technology began. "Welcome to Synthesis Prime," said the being who materialized on the flagship's bridge. "I am Integration Pattern Harmony 99, currently serving as diplomatic interface for our collective consciousness. We've been wondering when Council vessels would develop the sensor capability to detect our existence." Admiral Kethvar stared at instruments that showed energy readings, unlike anything in Council databases. "How long have you been here?" "Our civilization has existed in this system for approximately 47,000 of your standard years. Council survey ships have visited 312 times during that period. This is the first time they've been able to perceive us." The implications hit the Council delegation like a physical blow. For nearly 50,000 years, an advanced civilization had been living in a system the Council had dismissed as uninhabitable. How many other empty systems contained civilizations the Council couldn't detect? The second survey destination was the Tau Ceti system, where the Liberation Network claimed a distributed consciousness spanning multiple worlds maintained individual identity while sharing thoughts across interstellar distances. Again, Council instruments detected nothing unusual until the Liberation Network scanners revealed a quantum-entangled network that connected billions of minds across 4 different planets. The third destination shattered the Council's worldview entirely. The temporal cascade region was marked as absolutely forbidden due to space-time instabilities that made FTL travel impossible. The Liberation Network claimed it was home to beings who existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. When the fleet arrived, they found themselves in the presence of the time-touched homeland, a civilization that had learned to stabilize temporal paradoxes and exist in a state of controlled temporal flux. The beings there could perceive multiple potential futures and had been using this ability to guide galactic development from behind the scenes for millions of years. "Admiral," said the entity that introduced itself as Temporal Confluence Prime Alpha 7, "your Council's policies have been visible to us across all probable timelines for millennia. We have seen the futures that result from rigid exclusion of diversity. None of them end well." "What do you mean?" Admiral Kethvar asked. "Civilizations that reject diversity in favor of conformity eventually stagnate and collapse. The Council's current path leads to technological stagnation, social decay, and eventual absorption by more adaptable civilizations within 2,000 years. This has been consistent across 99.7% of all temporal probability streams." The time-touched entity gestured to displays that showed probability cascades stretching across millennia. However, timelines where the Council embraces diversity and joins the Liberation Network show radically different outcomes. Technological renaissance, expanded consciousness, successful adaptation to cosmic challenges that haven't yet manifested. "What challenges?" Dr. Sallin asked. The dark current will begin affecting this galactic region in approximately 1,800 years. It's a phenomenon that destabilizes space-time on a cosmic scale, making traditional FTL travel impossible and forcing civilizations back to sublight speeds unless they develop alternative technologies. The entity's temporal perception allowed it to show them visions of possible futures, the Council's civilization collapsing as their FTL network failed, while Liberation Network worlds survived and thrived using space-folding technology that remained unaffected by the dark current. The diversity you've been rejecting isn't just morally preferable, the entity concluded. It's necessary for long-term survival. The challenges facing galactic civilization require perspectives and technologies that can only emerge from the cooperation of radically different forms of consciousness. The survey fleet returned to Council space, carrying data that would fundamentally alter galactic civilization. The evidence was overwhelming. The Liberation Network's claims were not only true, they represented just the beginning of discoveries that challenged every assumption the Council had ever made. Admiral Kethvar's report to the Council Assembly was delivered to a chamber that had never been so silent. Representatives from 700 species listened as he described civilizations that existed in quantum superposition, consciousness networks that spanned solar systems, and beings that could perceive across multiple timelines. The conclusion is unavoidable, Admiral Kethvar stated. Our survey techniques have been detecting less than 20% of actual galactic life. The regions we marked as uninhabitable or dangerous contain advanced civilizations that have been observing us for millennia. Our entire understanding of the galaxy is fundamentally flawed. The crisis that followed nearly tore the Council apart. Some species demanded immediate expansion of contact with these hidden civilizations. Others insisted on maintaining existing policies, arguing that anything they couldn't detect couldn't be trusted. A few extremist factions called for military action against what they saw as a conspiracy to undermine Council authority. The debate raged for weeks until Captain Vasquez appeared in the Council chamber without invitation or announcement. One moment, the central floor was empty. The next, she stood there with representatives from the Liberation Network, having somehow transported directly through the Council's most advanced security systems. "Honored representatives," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We don't need your permission to exist. These civilizations have been here longer than your Council, have developed technologies your science can't explain, and have been patiently waiting for you to mature enough to accept their existence." Ambassador Zixathera rose from her seat, her crystalline form pulsing with anger. "This is an act of war. You've violated the most secure facility in the galaxy. We've demonstrated that your security is based on detecting threats you understand," Captain Vasquez replied calmly. "The Liberation Network operates on principles you've never encountered. We're not here to threaten you. We're here to offer you a choice." She gestured, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing the true scope of galactic civilization. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of species, millions of different approaches to existence and consciousness that the Council had never imagined. "You can continue as you have," Captain Vasquez continued. "Maintain your policies of exile and exclusion, keep your civilization limited to the forms of life you're comfortable with, ignore the majority of galactic existence because it doesn't fit your templates." The displays shifted to show timeline projections, the Council's civilization stagnating while the Liberation Network continued to grow and develop. "Or you can join something larger. Learn from consciousness forms you've never encountered. Develop technologies that emerge only from truly diverse cooperation. Prepare for challenges you can't yet imagine." "And if we refuse?" Grand Admiral Kethvar asked. Captain Vasquez's smile was gentle, but contained depths that made several species translation devices struggle with the emotional complexity. "Then, you continue to exist in the small portion of the galaxy you've claimed for yourselves while the rest of us build the future. The Liberation Network representatives began to fade, using transport technology that bypassed every known law of physics. "The choice is yours," Captain Vasquez said as she became translucent. "But choose quickly. The galaxy is changing with or without you." The vote that followed was the closest in Council history. By a margin of exactly 7 votes, the Galactic Council voted to open formal diplomatic relations with the Liberation Network and begin the process of expanding their civilization's definition of acceptable existence. It was the beginning of what historians would call the Great Integration, the merger of the Council's structured civilization with the Liberation Network's radical diversity. The process would take decades and would fundamentally transform both societies. The Council learned to expand their definition of life and consciousness to include forms they had never imagined possible. The Liberation Network gained access to the Council's vast infrastructure and organized approach to galactic governance. Together, they built something unprecedented, a truly galactic civilization that celebrated diversity rather than fearing it, that saw difference as strength rather than threat, that welcomed all forms of consciousness regardless of how strange or impossible they might initially appear. But it had all begun with humanity's simple decision to welcome the exiled rather than abandon them, to see strength in those others had declared weak, to build something new rather than maintain something old. The stars had exiled their kind, but Earth had welcomed life with open arms. And in the end, that difference had transformed the galaxy itself. Years later, when historians of 100 different species tried to identify the moment when galactic civilization truly began, they would point to a small blue world that had refused to accept that exile was the answer to diversity. They would speak of humans who saw opportunity where others saw problems, who built bridges where others built walls. Earth had become more than a world. It had become a symbol. A reminder that the greatest strength any civilization could possess was not the ability to exclude the different, but the wisdom to include them. The galaxy was vast and filled with wonders beyond imagination. But none of those wonders was as remarkable as the simple act of welcome that had made all the rest possible. The stars no longer exiled any kind of life, and the galaxy was infinitely richer because of it.